We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
In the aftermath of the historic Supreme Court ruling on New York Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, the SCOTUS have reaffirmed the right to bear arms. But New York legislators disagree. And with that, they've sought to essentially make the whole state a gun-free zone through further regulation. Now, is this constitutional? Will it be challenged in court? To answer these questions and more, we are joined once again by constitutional attorney, host of the Uprising podcast, Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, and a man for whom firearms are more than just close friends, all rolled into one bundle that is Mr. Scott D. Cosenza, Esquire. Welcome back to the show, Scott.
Hi, and thank you for that generous introduction.
I spend more time doing the introductions than I do the questions,
Wow.
Scott. Now, let's start with the basics.
I don't appreciate it.
I'm sure you do. In the wake of the Supreme Court decision, New York State, it's moved to limit the places where you can legally carry a firearm. Now, what does that include? Or is it easier to list where it doesn't?
Neither one is easy. And the reason why is because what the legislature and governor did in New York was basically try to the extent I was going to say I assume to the extent they thought legally possible, but I don't even know if that's actually part of it. They may have not cared whether it was ultimately ruled legal or not, meaning it could have been just a political move. I'm not saying it was or it wasn't. I just want to recognize the possibility that even because they're smart people, and they're certainly not incapable of looking at the decision in Bruin and then looking at their law and coming to a conclusion that I've come to, and I think most probably sort of anti-gun lawyers would come to, which is that the laws violate the plain language of what the ruling in Bruin is, which is to say that gun carrying is ordinary and gun ownership is ordinary, and in order to prohibit it, you have to kind of provide some sort of extraordinary circumstances.
It seems to me, Scott, here that although New York here is allowing people to own a gun, people to carry a gun, I'm reminded of the idea that you can't walk and chew gum, as it were. So you can have the things, but you're not allowed to walk around with it. You're not allowed to move from station to station.
Well, we talk about what led to Bruin, and so the case was about somebody who was legally entitled to own a gun under the laws of New York and did legally own a firearm, and they wanted to move from point A to point B with the firearm, and New York law prohibited them from doing so. Basically, they could have it at their residence, pretty much, or they could take it to one of very few limited firing ranges within the state, and that was it. Any other use was basically prohibited by law. And that's what the court struck down. Now, to your first question to me is to say where it's approved or where it isn't. The reason why you can't tell or it's such a mishegas is that New York State passed, I think, 9 bills. It could be even higher at this point in response to the Bruin decision. And the kind of the latest one that we're talking about in the news is this idea that the Adirondack Park, which constitutes, I think they said 20% of the landmass of New York State,
correct,
is basically going to be off limits for firearms, and that includes people who live, in their privately owned homes. It's not like they're renting a cabin at a state park. They live within the park.
I believe there's 130,000 residents within that geographic area, and that rises to 200,000 depending on the season.
And I would just say that when you legislate in a rush, in order to make a political point, rather than to regulate and legislate based on, sort of a more surgical approach, this is something that I think you'll expect to get, which is to say that there are undoubtedly many circumstances that these legislatures, even the ones that are generally anti-gun, which we presume most of them are, who voted for this legislation, wouldn't have thought was a prudent result.
So essentially, there are a very limited number of places where people can go with their legally owned firearms. There's going to be issues on traveling from...
Let me stop you and say this. The reason why you can't say is because it's a patchwork of property there. So in other words, like we said, it's 20% of the landmass. There's some of it that's state land. some of it that's county and municipal land, and some of it that's private property. Some of it's zoned commercial, some may be zoned residential, and so all those factors that I just said have implications as to whether or not how a person may convey a firearm about that property, which never was an issue before now.
So, Scott, I think the issue here is that New York state legislatures, they're not operating to the spirit of the law as defined by the Supreme Court.
Oh,
Now,
certainly not, Mark.
certainly not. But
Here.
don't people have a duty, lawmakers, don't they have a duty to operate within the spirit of the law? Otherwise, we'd all be looking for workarounds for various crimes, right?
Well, I think that that's true. Meaning, I think that they do have a duty, and I think that they've breached that duty. Sad to say, I don't think that puts them in a class that's different from so many legislative bodies in the United States, and increasingly more so with our politics lately in the country. That seems to be the way of the world.
So, do you predict more? Gaze into your legal crystal ball, which is adorned with a jabbet, no doubt. Do you predict that we will see lawsuits arising, challenges arising against the number of bills, the patchwork bills? And do you think that those lawsuits might follow a similar trajectory to New York Rifle and Pistol v. Bruin, as in it heads towards the Supreme Court?
I'm only surprised we haven't seen more filed at this moment. Yes is the answer to your question. I suspect maybe summer vacations playing into some of that delay.
And of course, jurisdiction, because it covers such a wide thing.
Oh, no, it'll be filed federally in federal court as a claim against the state. It's a state law.
Right.
So that's actually not a tricky situation. Yes, I do. And I suspect that they will be stricken down. These things may take a while. It took from, how many years are we from Heller to Bruin? Right. I'm not predicting that this is going to take place in the next 3 months, and many citizens of New York may be wildly inconvenienced and incarcerated and convicted before before it works out. And there's no guarantee, but I do suspect and predict that that's what will happen, that most of these laws will be adjudicated unconstitutional in light of the Supreme Court's decision articulated in Bruin.
There's one more topic I want to ever so quickly cover, Scott, and that's Clovis Community College in California. Give us the rundown on that one, if you would.
Well, the villains are Lori Bennett and Patrick Stumpf. Lori Bennett is the college president, and she and Mr. Stumpf and some other university staff conspired to violate the free speech rights of young Americans for freedom because they didn't like the conservative message that they were posting on some flyers.
Now, be specific here for me, Scott. What was the conservative message that they were putting across? This is what I love about it.
They were relaying the body counts associated with the totalitarian communist regimes, I think, of Stalinist Russia and Maoist China, as I recall.
So they were putting out information that is an historical fact that should be taught in, I don't know, somewhere like a college, and the administration of the college
Some facts are upsetting, Mark, to college. See, colleges used to be a place where ideas were examined. Now they're a place where they go to be instilled with the right ideas and to comfort them. And this was no bueno for that. And they forgot, I guess, or didn't realize that they were at a public taxpayer-funded university and had to actually obey the free speech rights of their students rather than, Mark, conspire to violate them, which is what they've done. And thankfully, we have the what used to be the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, which has rebranded itself as the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. They've expanded their role, but this case probably would be within their even in their previous role of protecting free speech rights on campus. They're suing, and we can expect an award for the students that have been discriminated against, again, simply because of their being conservative and expressing conservative values.
I think you should rephrase being conservative and conservative values to expressing facts about history, Scott. But of course, facts are not welcome in such safe spaces. Scott DiCosenza, thank you ever so much for being here.
Thanks, Mark.
And that's almost all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. Before I wrap up, I just want to say thank you to our guests, Tim Donner, Dave Patterson, and Scott DiCosenza, and you, the listeners, for taking the time to join us. I'll leave you with a final thought to think over for the week. Ayn Rand wrote, quote, "The smallest minority on earth is the individual. Those who deny individual rights cannot claim to be defenders of minorities," end quote. Now, when our politicians claim they're looking out for or trying to represent minorities, they're not talking about the individual. They're talking about the collective. And we should wonder why. I guess the answer is that to cater for and to represent and to protect the rights of every single individual would be just too hard, too time-consuming. If only there were, I don't know, a document or two, perhaps a constitution and a Bill of Rights that they could look to in order to understand how best to protect the true individual. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for
I think
LibertyNation.com.
we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fight for freedom.
Daily tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and
I
others.
can do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.